Kia ora. This class is going to briefly discuss the final two non-Mendelian inheritance patterns that we haven't covered so far, and they are multiple alleles and lethal alleles. So remembering, when we're talking about non-Mendelian inheritance, we are talking about inheritance patterns that show, unusual interactions between alleles that don't follow the complete dominance pattern that Gregor Mendel discovered, and that is having two alleles with one completely dominating the other in a heterozygous genotype. So anything that doesn't follow those rules we consider non-Mendelian, and the four traits we are looking at are incomplete dominance. So when you cross a pure breed for one phenotype, let's say a red flower, with a purely bred white flower, you will get 100% heterozygous offspring. However, unlike complete dominance in a heterozygote, this heterozygote will express a completely new phenotype, and it is actually a blend of the two parental phenotypes. So we've got a red parent and a white parent producing a pink offspring. Similar but not exactly the same as codominance, which is where the heterozygous offspring of these two purely bred flowers will show complete dominance in certain areas of the flower for either allele. So they co-dominate in particular areas, whereas here, neither is able to completely dominate the other. It is incomplete. The final two patterns we're looking at are multiple alleles and lethal alleles, but I want to stress that these patterns are not mutually exclusive, and as we'll see moving forward, you can have traits that express a combination of these, such as, for example, ABO blood typing, which not only has multiple options for the alleles, namely A, B, and O, but also shows codominance of two of those alleles and complete dominance of two over the third allele. So we're seeing a lot of interaction of these patterns depending on different traits. Okay, multiple alleles is as simple as it sounds. It is the fact that for a particular trait there may be more than two options for the allele that you might inherit. So to define multiple alleles, we would say genes that have more than two possible alleles, but something to bear in mind is that this does not mean individuals will inherit more than two possible alleles, just that they may inherit two out of a selection of alleles. You can think of this like going to get an ice cream from the dairy. Okay, you walk in and there are 10 flavors to choose from, but you're only allowed to get a double scoop. So you can get two of the same flavor, so that would be a homozygous ice cream. But you could get two of different flavors. You will still have at least 8, if not 9 flavors that you didn't get to try. Okay, so there are multiple allele options, but you still only inherit 2 in every generation. Okay, so as explained prior, human blood grouping using the ABO system shows that there are multiple alleles, namely A, B, and O, and they can be inherited in 6 different combinations. Okay, so the idea behind these alleles is that they provide the instructions for your body to create 2 different types of carbohydrate on the surface of red blood cells. So the A allele will provide the information for creating type A carbohydrate, the B allele type B carbohydrate, and finally, if you inherit the O allele, you are basically missing the information to create either of these carbohydrates, and so you have kind of smooth red blood cells that are missing these messengers. So those are our 3 alleles, but they interact in unique ways. Interestingly, if you inherit the information for creating type A carbohydrates, so these pink dots, and you inherit an allele from your other parent for type B, or these carbohydrates, the phenotype you will express is codominance of those 2 carbohydrates. You'll see some type A's and some type B's all around the surface of your red blood cells. So if you are type AB, you have one A allele and one B allele, and they codominate together in the expression of your phenotype. So that is a new phenotype relative to these 2. But the other interaction is either of those 2 alleles with a type O allele, and we note that with a lowercase I to show that it is recessive. So if you inherit a type O allele, with either a type A or a type B, those alleles will completely dominate type O, and you will produce carbohydrates on the surface of your red blood cells. So the only way to express this phenotype here, type O blood, is to have inherited 2 copies of that type O allele. Okay, you can pause here for more information. Okay, here are the 6 combinations of those alleles that are possible. So 2 of these combinations can code for the same phenotype, being type A. If you are homozygous for the type A allele, meaning you got one from mum and one from dad, you will definitely be able to produce type A carbohydrate, and that is the phenotype you will express. However, if you got a type A from one parent and a type O from the other, well, that type A information completely dominates, and you will express the same type of red blood cells as this homozygous individual. Okay, the same can be said for type B and heterozygous for type B, which means you have inherited a type B allele along with a type O, which is completely masked. The 2 more interesting phenotypes are type AB. If you are able to produce both of those types of carbohydrate, you must have the allele for both of those types of carbohydrate. So there is only one possible genotype, and that is type A allele and type B allele. And finally, to express the recessive trait, just like in complete dominance cases, the only way to do that is to have inherited only the recessive alleles. Otherwise, that phenotype would be completely dominated by the carbohydrates coded for by type A or type B. Okay, so just a reminder over here, every pair of chromosomes you have is made of 2 homologous chromosomes. Okay, of course there are cases of aneuploidy where this is not followed, but in a general sense, you will inherit 2 of every gene, so 1 on each chromosome at the same loci. They can be providing different information, so that's given by the different colors here, and those would be different alleles, but you will always only have 2. Okay, so this is just a reminder to practice using those genotype descriptors. All right, and so you can pause and have a think about these questions if you like, and they are classic questions for the exams on these cases. Okay, could a man with type AB blood have fathered a child with type O? I don't even have to finish that sentence to say not possible. We know that a child with type O blood must have the genotype little I, and one of those little i's would have had to have come from dad. However, this father here must have the genotype capital I A, capital I B, and so he doesn't have a little I to pass down. So there is no way, and you can demonstrate this using a Punnett square. Another example of multiple alleles is seen in rabbit fur color. So we've got 4 alleles here. Again, every rabbit will only ever inherit 2 of these, but they are black, so that's the capital C. We can already tell something about the black allele then, given that information. C with the superscript CH for chinchilla, C with the superscript H for Himalayan, and finally lowercase c, which codes for albino. Okay, interestingly, there is a dominance hierarchy among these alleles. We need to know, how do they interact? Do they codominate? Is there complete dominance, etc.? Let's have a look. So here you can see what happens when you have any 2 of these 4 alleles interacting. So anytime that the color brown allele is inherited, it will be expressed in the phenotype. So it is completely dominant over all other alleles. So you can have a homozygous brown rabbit who inherited 2 of those alleles, or you can have a heterozygous brown rabbit that is carrying the allele for any of these other phenotypes. However, that is masked in the phenotype of that rabbit. So the brown completely dominates. Okay, the next allele we can look at is chinchilla. Although it is recessive to brown, it is dominant to the other 2 alleles. So you can have a homozygous chinchilla, or you could have a chinchilla that is masking the allele for Himalayan or albino. Alright, I think you get the picture. So Himalayan is recessive to both chinchilla and brown. We can see that here. So it's recessively being masked in this chinchilla, and it is recessively being masked in this brown rabbit. And then finally, albino. The only way to inherit the albino phenotype is to have been provided 2 copies of that albino allele and nothing else present in the genotype that could possibly dominate the phenotype. Okay, that's pretty much it for multiple alleles. Okay, so the next video will cover lethal alleles. Have a go at that Google Doc that I set on Google Classroom and just let me know if you have any questions. Ka kite.